A lot of us are angry these days. As fans of properties that we grew up with and we have a huge, strong emotional connection, seeing those brands change and get twisted and even have political agendas is very, very, well, betraying. It feels like a betrayal, right? I mean, we grew up with brands, we supported them, we bought merchandise, we waited in line outside, slept in tents, or an inflatable Millennium Falcon in my case, and now we see brands have changed. And for example, with Masters of the Universe, I've said that I've enjoyed the new show. I recognize that it does absolutely have a kind of woke agenda, but I still see it as a cool what if. And that's really how I see the new show as well, the new show, the CGI one. And a lot of fans have also expressed feeling like this isn't Motu. Well, that's because,
It's not about you.
you see, let's go back in time a little bit. And hey, I'll talk about myself. I love talking about myself, right? I was born in 1978, about a year after Star Wars came out, which was obviously a major change in pop culture and a major change in movie licensing. Before Star Wars, nobody thought that a movie could sell toys. Movies were in the theater and then they were gone, and no one wanted to give a licensing deal. And getting to grow up in the 80s, being born in this time period, I was a child during a golden age of action figure play when, well, regulations with the FCC allowed so many cool things to happen, and the 80s became a more innocent time, but a time filled with play. And those of us who grew up in this time period have very fond memories, not just of the time, but because our childhoods were less complicated, and they literally were less complicated than today. I mean, look what you could get away with as a Halloween costume back then. Well, toys became a vehicle to remember that. And the toy properties that also have content is what takes us back. Fast forward to kids from no, not these kids from today. That's a terrible example. These kids from today. Okay, well, it's an extreme example with the whole mask thing, but the point is, children today are more different. They're changed more than we realize. More so from kids in the 80s, if you will. And I want to explain that because I think it might shed some light on the changes that we've seen to properties and give some explanation of whether properties could survive. Now, obviously, things are better in the world than they were in the 80s, right? We have, more medicine, we have more technology, but is this giving children a better childhood? All of the improvements we've had in the last 30, 40 years. I mean, look at toys from the 80s, right? We had the Rubik's Cube, awesome toy. It was like the ultimate original fidget toy. Well, now kids can have an app that just tells you how to solve it. Is that progress? Or let's look at Masters of the Universe. And fans will say, well, wait a minute. If He-Man worked for kids in the 80s, why does it have to change for kids for today? Can't we just take the exact same show and show it to kids? I mean, it's available on DVD or maybe a streaming service here and there. If we all enjoyed it and found it to be such an inspiration for our, play and our imaginations, shouldn't it just work on kids? I mean, surely there can't be that many differences between generations.
And don't call me Shirley.
Well, I've made videos before about how properties, toy, and movie, TV shows are really a product of their time and work because of the time they're in. Nowadays, if you look at Masters of the Universe, it tends to be a property that adults are into who grew up with it, and to kind of say they're dragging their kids along with them is a bit of an understatement, because kids really don't have any cognitive schema, like who this property is. I mean, obviously they see classics at retail, and they might be aware of the Revelation show on Netflix, but it's not something that just immediately translates to play because they don't have any memories of growing up with it. Yeah, dad might really be into it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that kid is just going to pick it up because dad liked the toy or mom liked the toy. It's the kind of thing that kids want to have their own thing. Each generation, they don't, want last generation's toys. It's why you didn't see this, nostalgic boom of Howdy Doody merchandise in the 80s because, kids in the 80s that wanted to all play with the toys their parents played with. So, looking at the new show on Netflix, the new show, the CGI one, which is absolutely aimed at kids, the reason that it's so different and has so many changes, both in style, in gender swapping, in the fact that it's now a team, it's because, well, the youth of today are, I guess, more different than we were in the 80s than just maybe standard generation gaps provide. And there's reasons for this. There are cultural reasons, there are technological reasons, and a big part of this is how fast kids are growing up these days. And I don't mean it's because we're secretly putting all of those pills in their cereal every morning. It's because the way the technology has emerged, and with the internet, and really with what I would call the instant gratification of the world, and the way kids are now what are thought of as screen natives. They grew up with it. It was not introduced to them like it was for those of us who are adults. And these natives are in an impulse society because everything is available immediately. There are things when we were children in the 80s and 70s and 90s where we had to wait to get something. And there was a payoff. There was a feeling of earning it. If you had to wait in line, if you had to wait for something to show up, if you had to, the new records came out. I know, records, right? Well, records are kind of back. You would wait in line and hope that the new band's album came in, and it was an experience going to the record store and interacting with clerks and other record fans. Now kids just say, Alexa, play the latest album for me, and it's instant. There's no feeling of earning it. And while adults have grown up and, some of us still want toys, a lot of it's because of that nostalgia. That's why we're buying toys. As far as kids buying toys, the age has gone down dramatically. Most of us who grew up in the 70s and 80s played with toys maybe up to right before preteen. Today, it pretty much stops at the 4th and 5th birthday, and that is a very, very dramatic thing. Yes, as adult collectors, we like to take our toys and put them behind glass so that dust can't even get on them and we can admire them like you would admire something found in a museum, as maybe Indiana Jones would say. But this is not play. This is collecting. This is acquisition. When it comes to toys for kids these days who need play, play stops earlier than ever. And it's because of screens. It's because of all of the political changes in the world. It's because of the instant gratification technology provides. And that is why the toys and the show that is aimed at kids, the new Masters of the Universe Netflix show, feels so different and feels like it's not for us. Because as mentioned earlier, it isn't for us. It's for today's children. Because if kids are going to get into the brand, it's not going to be getting into the form factor and storylines that their parents grew up with, because they see that just like we saw Davy Crockett and Howdy Doody. Those were old properties. They want something they can own. And the brand has to be reimagined for today's kids because today's kids are very, very different. And the biggest thing being the fact that they stop playing earlier than generation prior, just one generation prior. We played with toys for, the greater part of a decade. Now it's half a decade that you get kids playing with toys. So if you want kids playing with toys, you kind of have to follow the spreadsheet. And that's why the new CGI show looks so much like, shall we say, other content that's out there for kids, because this is what kids consume these days. Kids want content that's very different. It's much faster. It's brighter. There's more explosions. I mean, just the pacing is so much different. And again, technology and that instant gratification that comes with it is a big factor in this. So as kids age out of toys faster, in order to get them into a new toy line or a new property, well, toy companies do huge amounts of research with kids, and they know that they need to make toys and content that appeals to the toy playing segment of the population, if you will, which again cuts off at like 4 or 5, maybe 6. I mean, yes, there's exceptions, but for the most part, this trend continues. So you can't just put an old He-Man show in front of them. And this was tried in 2001 when Mattel relaunched Masters of the Universe with the 2000X or Mike Young series. And it didn't do well with kids because kids were no longer into this look. They saw He-Man as a naked guy in a furry loincloth, and it was lacking the context of the '80s with the giant muscle heroes like Stallone and Schwarzenegger. Going in a new direction is really the only choice they have. They tried just providing the same content, just updated with a look in 2001. It didn't work. While we loved this show as collectors and thought it was an awesome homage to the show and the toy line we grew up with, kids who needed to be the main audience of it, both in a retail point of view and a ratings point of view, weren't into it. So to get kids into Masters of the Universe, it has to be reimagined. It has to, take the core DNA and start over again. So, hoping that this works. What do you think? Leave comments below. Are your kids playing with toys still? Do they stop at 5 or 6? Let me know. Leave a comment, leave a like, leave a share, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Thanks for watching.